HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Secret Letters of the Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. Read by Adam Verner. Go as far as you can see. When you get there, you'll be able to see farther. Thomas Carlyle. Prologue. My wordless guide was moving quickly ahead of me, as if he too disliked being down here. The tunnel was damp and dimly lit. The bones of 6 million Parisians were entombed in this place. Suddenly, the young man stopped at the entranceway of a new tunnel. It was separated from the one we had followed by a piece of rusted iron fencing. The tunnel was dark. My guide moved the fence to one side and turned into the blackness. He paused and looked behind at me, making sure I was following. I moved uncertainly out of the anemic light as his back disappeared in front of me. I took a few more steps. Then my foot knocked against something. A wooden rattle filled the air, and I froze. As I did, light flared around me. My guide had snapped on his flashlight. Suddenly I wished he hadn't. The gruesome orderliness was gone. Bones were everywhere, scattered across the floor around our feet, cascading from loose stacks against the walls. The glare from the flashlight caught on waves of dust and tendrils of cobwebs that hung from the ceiling. "Ça c'est pour vous," said my guide. He thrust the flashlight at me. As I took it, he brushed past me. "What?" I began to call out. Before I could finish my question, the man snapped, "Il vous racontera ici," and then he was gone, leaving me alone, 50 feet underground. A solitary human being standing in a sea of the dead. Chapter 1. It was one of those days you find yourself wishing was over before you've got even 10 minutes into it. It started when my eyes opened, and I noticed an alarming amount of sunlight seeping in under the bedroom blinds. You know, an 8 a.m. amount of light, not a 7 a.m. amount of light. My alarm had not gone off. That realization was followed by 20 minutes of panicked cursing and shouting and crying. My 6-year-old son did the crying, as I careened around the house, from bathroom to kitchen to front door, trying to gather all the ridiculous bits of stuff Adam and I needed for the rest of our day. As I pulled up in front of a school 45 minutes later, Adam shot me a reproachful look. "Mom says if you keep dropping me off late at school on Mondays, I won't be able to stay over Sunday nights anymore." "Oh, boy. Last time," I said. "Last time, I promise." Adam was sliding out of the car now, a doubtful expression on his face. "Here," I said, holding up a bulging plastic bag. "Don't forget your lunch." "Keep it," Adam said, not looking at me. "I'm not allowed to bring peanut butter to school." And then he turned on his heel and raced through the deserted school playground. Poor kid, I thought as I watched his little legs pumping toward the front door. Nothing worse than heading into school late, everyone already in class, the national anthem blaring through the hallways. That, and no lunch to boot. I threw the plastic bag onto the passenger seat and sighed. Another custodial weekend had come to an inglorious end. I had apparently failed spectacularly as a husband. Now it appeared that I would fail with equal flamboyance as a separated dad. From the moment I picked Adam up, I seemed to provide an unending series of disappointments. Despite the fact that all week I felt Adam's absence like a missing limb, I invariably arrived late on Fridays. The promised treat of pizza and a movie was dampened by the tuna sandwich that Anisha made Adam eat as his dinner hour came and went. And then there was my phone, which chirped incessantly, like it had a bad case of hiccups. It beeped during the movie, and when I was tucking Adam into bed, it beeped during our breakfast of slightly burned pancakes, and while we walked to the park. It beeped as we picked up take-out burgers, and all through story time. Of course, the beeping wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that I kept picking the thing up. I checked my messages. I sent responses. I talked on the phone. And with each interruption, Adam became a little quieter, a little more distant. It broke my heart, yet the thought of ignoring the thing or turning it off made my palms sweat. As I raced to work, I brooded about the botched weekend. When Anisha had announced that she wanted a trial separation, it felt like someone had backed over me with a truck. She had been complaining for years that I never spent time with her or Adam, that I was too caught up with work, too busy with my own life to be part of theirs. But how, I argued, does leaving me fix any of that? If you want to see more of me, why are you making sure that you see less? She had, after all, said she still loved me, said she wanted me to have a good relationship with my son. But by the time I had moved into my own apartment, I was bruised and bitter. I had promised to try to spend more time at home. I had even begged off a company golf tournament and a client dinner. But Anisha said that I was only tinkering. I wasn't committed to fixing what was wrong. Every time I thought of those words, I clenched my teeth. Couldn't Anisha see how demanding my work was? Couldn't she see how important it was for me to keep moving ahead? If I hadn't been putting in the kind of hours I was, we wouldn't have our great house, or the cars, or the awesome big-screen TVs. Well, okay, I admit it. Anisha didn't give a damn about the TVs, but still. I made a promise to myself then. I will be a great, separated dad. I'll lavish attention on Adam. I'll go to all the school events. I'll be available to drive him to swimming or karate. I'll read him books. When he phones at night, I'll have all the time in the world to talk with him. I'll listen to his problems, give advice, and share jokes. I'll help him with homework, and I'll even learn to play those annoying video games he likes. I'll have a wonderful relationship with my son, even if I can't have one with my wife. And I'll show Anisha that I'm not just tinkering. The first few weeks apart, I think I did pretty well. In some ways, it wasn't so hard. But I was shocked by how much I missed both of them. I would wake up in my apartment and listen for the tiny voice I knew wasn't there. I would pace around at night thinking, this is the time when I might be reading a bedtime story. This is when I might give Adam his good-night hug. And this is the moment I would be crawling into bed with Anisha, the moment I would be holding her in my arms. The weekends couldn't come soon enough for me. But as the months ticked on, those thoughts began to fade. Or, more truly, they were crowded out by everything else. I would bring work home each evening or stay at work late. When Adam called, I'd be tapping away on my computer and hearing only every other sentence. Whole weeks would go by without me thinking once about what he might be doing during the days. When the school break came, I realized that I hadn't booked any time off to spend with him. And then I scheduled a client dinner on the night of Adam's spring school concert. I also forgot to take him for his 6-month dental cleaning, even though Anisha had reminded me just the week before. And I started to show up late on Fridays. This weekend was just another installment of quality time that was anything but. I gave Danny, the security guard, a little wave as I pulled into the office parking lot. After my crazy rush to be here, I suddenly wished I wasn't. I pulled into my space, but I didn't turn off the engine right away. In my defense, my obsession with work was completely natural. It was a highly stressful time at the company. Rumors had been flying for months that we were about to be sold. I had spent the last 12 weeks doing nothing but churning out reports. Sales reports, inventory reports, staffing reports, profit and loss statements. When I closed my eyes at night, all I could see were the crowded grid lines of a spreadsheet. That was what awaited me inside the building, but I couldn't put it off any longer. I turned the engine off, grabbed my laptop case, and headed in. I said hello to Devon, our receptionist. His head was bent studiously over his computer screen, but I knew he was playing solitaire. As I veered right, I could see Devon smirking, but maybe I was just imagining that. The shortest route to my office is to the left, but I no longer went that way. Devon obviously thought that was because Tessa's desk was to the right, but that was only an added bonus. If I went to the right, I didn't have to go past Juan's office. Juan. Damn, I don't know why I should be bothered so much after all this time. It was only an unused office now. The blinds were up, the desk was clear, the chair was vacant. There were no pictures of Juan's wife and children on the filing cabinet, no coffee mugs on the credenza, no plaques on the wall. But it was as if the shadow of all those things hovered over the empty spaces. I slowed my pace as I approached Tessa's cubicle. Tessa and I had worked together for years. We had always got along well. We shared the same sense of humor. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with Anisha, but I had to admit that I had found myself thinking a lot about Tessa since the split. I caught a glimpse of her dark hair, but she was on the phone, so I kept going. Almost as soon as I was through my office door, I found myself turning around. I wondered if I should check out the new prototype before I started on more pressing work. I knew the design team would let me know about any developments, but the thought of distracting myself with a few minutes in the lab was tempting. The design lab was where I'd started out. One of my first jobs was in the development sector of this place, an auto parts manufacturer. It was my dream job. Juan, the technical director, took me under his wing. Juan was my mentor. But the thing is, even if you love your job, you can't stay put. That's a career killer. But no one had to tell me that. I was like a dog wagging my tail so hard that I'd put my back out. The people above noticed. When the next rung of the corporate ladder was offered to me, Juan took me into his office. "You know," he said, "if you take this position, you'll be out of research and design for good. You'll be selling and managing. Is that what you want?" "I want to move ahead, Juan," I said, laughing. "And I'm sure not going to wait for you to retire to do that." Juan gave me only a weak smile, but he didn't say anything else. After that first step, I moved up through the ranks pretty quickly. Now I was overseeing all our projects and products production for our biggest client. I picked up my coffee mug, about to head down the hall to the lab, but then I stopped. There was no need for me to be there. I put my coffee cup down and dropped into my chair. I snapped on my computer, opened a file, and turned my eyes to the maze of numbers that filled my screen. A few hours later, I had just finished yet another profit and loss statement and was about to return to my overflowing inbox when the phone rang. It took me a few seconds to recognize my mother's voice. She sounded upset. Good Lord, I thought, now what? My mother had been inordinately interested in my life in recent months. It was beginning to annoy me. "Sorry to have bothered you at work, Jonathan, but this is important," she said. "I've just been talking with Cousin Julian, and he needs to see you right away. It's urgent." Me? I thought. Why on earth would Cousin Julian need to see me? To be frank, I didn't really know Cousin Julian. He wasn't my cousin, but my mother's. She had been close with Julian and his sister Catherine when they were all small, but I grew up on the other side of the country. Far-flung relatives were as interesting to me as last week's newspaper. The only time I ever met Julian, I was about 10. We were visiting Cousin Catherine, and she arranged a dinner at her house. I don't recall whether Julian's wife was with him, or whether he was already divorced. To tell you the truth, I don't remember anything at all about the visit, except for one thing: Julian's bright red Ferrari. I had heard Catherine mention it, so I was waiting on the front steps when he peeled up the driveway. The car was even more fabulous than I had pictured. Julian saw my face. My chin must have been scraping the top of my shoes, and he invited me for a ride. I had never been in a car that moved so fast. It felt as if, at any moment, The wheels might leave the pavement, and we would be airborne. I don't think I said a word the whole ride. When we arrived back at the house, Julian got out of the car, but I didn't move. "You want to hang around in the car for a while?" he asked. I nodded. He turned to leave, but before he could go, I stopped him. "Cousin Julian?" "Yes," he said. "How did you get this car?" I asked. "I mean, does it cost a lot of money?" "It sure does," he said. "So if you want one of these yourself, Jonathan, you're going to have to work really, really hard when you grow up." I never forgot that. As I remember, Julian didn't stick around long after dinner. Mom and Cousin Catherine seemed disappointed, maybe a little annoyed. Although I was only 10, I could imagine that Julian had much more exciting places to be. He was clearly living the kind of life that I wanted when I got older. I watched with envy as Julian's fabulous sports car tore down the street. After years of saying nothing about the man, Mom had begun to invoke Julian's name every time we got together. She had recently told me the Ferrari was long gone. Cousin Julian had apparently gone through some sort of life-changing experience. He'd quit his extremely lucrative job as a high-powered litigator, sold the Ferrari, and embraced a simple existence. Mom said he had studied with a little-known group of monks who lived deep in the Himalayas, and that he now often went around in a crimson robe. She said he was an utterly different man. I wasn't sure why she seemed to think this was such a good thing. And she had been trying to get the two of us together. She had suggested that I make time to visit with him when I was in his city on business. But, frankly, if I didn't have enough time for Anisha or Adam, why would I take a day off to spend with a man I hardly knew? Besides, if he'd still been a phenomenally successful lawyer with a glamorous lifestyle and a flashy sports car, I might have seen the point. But why did I need to spend time with an unemployed old man with no Ferrari? There were plenty of guys like him hanging around in my local bar. "Mom," I said, "what are you talking about? Why does Julian need to see me?" Mom didn't have details. She said Julian needed to talk with me. He needed my help with something. "That's nuts," I said. "I haven't seen Cousin Julian in years. I don't know the guy. There has to be someone else who can help." Mom didn't say anything, but I thought I could hear her crying softly. The last couple of years since my dad died had been tough on her. "Mom," I said, "are you okay?" She sniffled a bit, but then started talking in a steely tone that I barely recognized. "Jonathan, if you love me, you'll do this. You'll do whatever Julian wants you to do." "But what?" I didn't get a chance to finish my question. "There will be a plane ticket waiting for you when you get home tonight." She started another sentence, but her voice began to crack. "Jonathan, I need to go," she said, and then hung up. It was hard to concentrate for the rest of the afternoon. The phone call was so unlike my mother. Her forcefulness and desperation unnerved me. And then there was the whole mystery of the thing. What on earth did Julian want me to do? I wondered about this life change of his. Had he gone completely off his rocker? Was I going to meet with some old coot ranting about government conspiracies? Some wild-haired fellow who shuffled down the street in his housecoat and slippers? I knew that's not what Mom meant by crimson robes, but I couldn't get that image out of my mind. I was so preoccupied by these thoughts that I walked right past Juan's office as I left for the day. It wasn't until I entered the lobby that I realized what I had done. It felt like a bad omen. When I got back to my apartment, I almost forgot to check the mailbox. I struggled with the bent key for a few minutes, and then the little metal door flew open, spitting pizza flyers and insurance offers all over the floor. As I shoveled them up, my hand settled on a thick envelope. It was from my mother. I sighed, stuffed it in my pocket, and headed up the stairs to my apartment. I opened the envelope while my frozen lasagna entree spun around in the microwave. Inside was a short note from my mother explaining that Julian was temporarily living in Argentina and a return airline ticket to Buenos Aires. Good Lord, I thought. They want me to take a 12-hour flight to meet up with a distant cousin for an hour or two? Over the weekend? Great. I would have to spend my entire weekend in a flying sardine tin and disappoint my son. That, or upset my mom even more than she was already disappointed. I ate my lukewarm lasagna in front of the TV, hoping a large tumbler of scotch would mask the crumminess of my dinner and the misery of my mood. I put off phoning Anisha until I was sure Adam would be in bed. Anisha is a stickler for routine, so there was no guesswork there. When she answered the phone, she sounded tired, but not unhappy. I braced myself for her mood to change when I told her about my possible weekend plans. But Anisha knew about it already. "I've talked with your mom, Jonathan," she said. "You need to do this. Adam will understand." So that was that. Chapter 2. The taxicab had moved from the highway onto an extraordinarily wide boulevard. It looked like a typical city street, lined with trees on either side, a green island separating oncoming traffic, but it was at least 10 lanes wide. I had never been to South America before, and was surprised by how much Buenos Aires looked like a European city. An enormous obelisk, resembling the Washington Monument, split the scene in front of me, but the buildings and the streets reminded me a little of Paris. Julian had booked me on a red-eye on Friday night. I had surprised myself by falling asleep on the flight, waking just as the plane was setting down. And now here it was morning, but in another hemisphere from the one I had fallen asleep in. The Belle Époque-style stone buildings, black cast-iron balconies, and window boxes continued as we drove, but eventually we moved into an area that looked older, a bit tatty around the edges. There was graffiti on the walls, stucco chipping off the sides of buildings, dusty, faded awnings. Although it was a cool fall day here, a number of windows were open, and I could see curtains flapping in the breeze. On one corner, musicians were gathered, playing for a small group of onlookers. The cab was slowing now, pulling up to a storefront. The sign painted on the window announced tango lessons. Music drifted out of the half-open front door. I double-checked the address Julian had given me. This dance studio appeared to be it. I showed the piece of paper to the cabbie to make sure we were in the right part of town, that this wasn't some sort of mix-up. He nodded and then shrugged his shoulders. I paid and got out of the cab. Wow, I thought, peering through the half-open door. When Mom said that Julian had changed his life, she wasn't kidding. The room was long but not deep. Its walls were painted a rich red, and glass chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Men and women, holding each other closely yet with a certain formality, stepped around the room in time with the pulsing music. As I watched, a tall, stylishly dressed man separated himself from his partner and threaded his way through the twirling dancers. When he got close to me, I could see he was smiling. "Jonathan," he said, "I'm so glad you made it." He held out his hand, and we shook. It took me a minute to reconcile the man standing before me with the picture I had imagined on my way here. Julian looked far younger than he had when we met over 20 years ago. His lean, muscular frame bore no resemblance to the pasty, bloated figure who had sat behind the wheel of that Ferrari. His face was unlined and relaxed. His bright blue eyes seemed to cut right through me. "Please excuse me," Julian said, waving his hand around the room. "I wasn't sure what time your flight would arrive, so I thought I would take my Saturday lesson. But now that you're here, let's head upstairs." Julian led me to a door, which I hadn't seen from the entranceway. Opening it, he gestured for me to head up the stairs. When I got to the top, he moved past me and opened another door. Come in," he said, as he stepped into the room. The apartment was bright and spacious, but nothing like the kind of home I imagined Julian living in. The furniture was an odd assortment of old and new, Posters of musicians and dancers doing the tango adorned the walls, and stacks of books sat on the floor. It looked a bit like the home of a college student. "I'm sorry to have made you travel such a distance at short notice, but I've been staying in this gorgeous city for the past few months. A friend was looking to sublet his apartment, and since I've always wanted to learn to tango, I thought this was the perfect opportunity. Let me get changed, and then I'll make us some coffee." Julian disappeared down a long, narrow hallway. I sank into a chair that was covered with a cotton throw with the words, "Be Extraordinary," embroidered in its center. I could hear the tango music drifting up the stairs and feel it humming under the floorboards. As I waited for Julian, my mind began to race. What was I doing? What did I know of this man? I felt a powerful sense of unease move through me. Somehow I knew that as soon as Julian walked back into the room, my life would never be the same. I sensed that what lay ahead of me was going to be difficult and exhausting. I don't have to do this, I thought. I looked over my shoulder to the doorway, wondering how long it would take me to find another cab. Just then, Julian walked back into the room. He was now wearing a long crimson robe. The hood draped his head. "Tea or coffee?" he asked as he moved into a small kitchen at the far end of the living room. "Coffee, please," I said. I felt awkward sitting in the living room alone. I got up and followed Julian into the kitchen. As Julian prepared the coffee maker, I looked out of the window down to the narrow cobblestone street. The dance class must have broken up because couples were pouring out onto the sidewalk below. The syncopated music had been replaced with the sound of talking and laughing. Finally, I turned to Julian. "What?" I hesitated, trying not to be too indelicate. I started again. "What do you need from me? Why did you want to see me?" "Jonathan," said Julian as he leaned against the counter, "do you know my story?" I wasn't sure what Julian was getting at. I told him that I knew he had been a litigation lawyer who had made a fortune and had lived a lavish lifestyle. I told him that I heard he'd had a change of heart and left his practice. I wasn't clear about the details. "It's true," said Julian. "At one point I was more successful than I had ever dreamed I could be, as far as fame and money go. But I was destroying my life. When I wasn't consumed by work, I was smoking cigars and drinking expensive cognac, having a wild time with young models and new friends. It ruined my marriage, and my lifestyle began to take a toll on my career. I was in a downward spiral, but I didn't know how to stop. One day, in the middle of arguing a big case, I crashed to the floor of the courtroom. A heart attack. That rang a bell. Mom had probably told me something about this, but I obviously hadn't been paying too much attention. Julian shook the hood from his head and then reached up to a shelf above the sink to pull down 2 mugs. I spent months recovering my health. During that time, I made a decision. I sighed. This is where that lovely Ferrari got tossed. I sold my mansion, my car, all my possessions, and I headed to India, hoping to learn what I could of the wisdom of the world. You see, building my net worth had become less interesting to me than discovering my self-worth, and chasing beautiful women had given way to pursuing enduring happiness. I stifled a sigh. It sounded as if this was the beginning of a long story. I was impatient to hear what any of it had to do with me. During my travels deep in the Himalayas, I had the great good fortune of coming upon an exceptional man. He was a monk, one of the sages of Sedona. He took me high into the mountains to the village where the sages lived, studied and worked. The sages taught me many remarkable lessons that I would love to share with you. Julian paused and looked down toward my feet. I realized with embarrassment that I had been tapping my foot like some impatient customer in a shop line. Julian smiled. But I sense that now is not the time. Sorry, I said. I guess...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?